SLT Mobitel, the connection. SLT Mobitel, the connection.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, quashed. Major General Priyanka Fernando, who made a gesture towards protesting LTTE sympathizers, acquitted. Helping hand. China Sinopharm given the go-ahead for emergency use by the government. 600,000 doses expected within 2 weeks. Getting the facts right. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa hits back at environmental destruction claims. Also insists that media freedom isn't media institution owners' freedom. Negligence and carelessness. 14 people killed as bus falls down a precipice. All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Saturday, the 20th of March, 2021.
ඇල්කොහොල් අඩංගු hand sanitizer භාවිත කරන්න. ලෙඩ රෝග ඇති කරන විෂ බීජවලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරන්න. හඳුන්වා දීමේ මිල රුපියල් 350යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammik Hekanai. Now, the UK High Court has quashed the conviction against Major General Priyanka Fernando over his actions in face of a protest staged by LTT sympathisers in front of the Sri Lanka High Commission in London in the island's Day of Independence in 2018. During the protest, Major General Fernando, who was the Minister Councillor Defence at the time at the Sri Lanka High Commission, made certain gestures towards the LTT sympathisers. The Westminster Magistrates Court convicted Major General Fernando in 2019 in his absence, saying that he was not entitled to diplomatic immunity as the court found that the facts complained of did not form part of his job description. The appeal made to the UK High Court by Major General Priyanka Fernando, the former Minister Councillor Defence of the Sri Lanka High Commission in London, against the judgment of the Westminster Magistrates Court on him was allowed yesterday. In the judgment handed down by the High Court, it decided in favour of Major General Fernando and quashed his conviction handed by the Westminster Magistrates Court on the 6th of December 2019, thereby acquitting him. Pro-LTT demonstrators staged protests in front of the Sri Lanka High Commission in London on the island's 70th Day of Independence on the 4th of February in 2018, during which Major General Priyanka Fernando, who was a brigadier at the time and was the Minister Councillor Defence of the High Commission, made certain gestures towards the LTTE sympathisers.
Justice! Let me want it! No! We want justice! Let me want it! No!
The High Court compellingly rejected the arguments of the defendants and, accepting the arguments on behalf of Major General Fernando, upheld the traditional views on diplomatic immunity as contained in the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, to which both Sri Lanka and the UK are states parties. In its judgment, the court said that the interpretation of the treaty should not be an exercise in pedantic literalism and it should be read in the context of its object and purpose. The court added that the efficacy of the Vienna Convention depends even more than most treaties do on its reciprocal operation. The UK High Court also draws the danger of the threat to the efficient performance of the diplomatic functions, which arises from the risk of trumped-up or baseless allegations and unsatisfactory tribunals. It opines that from the United Kingdom's point of view, a significant purpose of conferring diplomatic immunity of foreign diplomatic personnel in Britain is to ensure that the British diplomatic personnel enjoy corresponding immunities elsewhere. In its judgment, the High Court bench said that they consider the acts in question in the case were ones which were performed by Major General Priyanka Fernando in the exercise of his functions as a member of the mission and thus qua diplomat. The bench also decided that the Chief Magistrate of the Westminster Magistrates Court was not right in her determination that Major General Fernando was not covered by residual immunity when he faced trial at the Westminster Magistrates Court.
Sri Lanka's best health insurance with the fastest claim settlement. Soft Logic Life.
Pay just 500,000 rupees to reserve your unit today. Mulberry Residence.
Now, Sri Lanka's National Medicines Regulatory Authority today granted approval for the emergency use of China's Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccine. With this development, the Sinopharm vaccine becomes the third vaccine to receive the emergency use approval in the island. State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channa Jayasumana, says that 600,000 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine is expected in the island within the next 2 weeks as a donation from China.
Sri Lanka granted emergency approval for the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine on the 22nd of January earlier this year, after which the country began its inoculation program against COVID-19 on the 29th of the same month. Since then, the National Medicines Regulatory Authority of Sri Lanka granted approval for 2 other vaccines. One of them is the Russian-made Sputnik 5 vaccine, which received approval on the 5th of March, and the other is the Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccine developed by China, which received approval today. As such, the State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channa Jayasumana, says that China has confirmed that it will donate 600,000 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine to Sri Lanka, and it is the hope of the government to bring the consignment to the island as quickly as possible.
මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් අප චීන තානාපති කාර්යාලය දැනුවත් කරා ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ චීන තානාපතිතුමා බීජිං සමග සාකච්ඡා කරලා ලංකාවට ගෙනෙන්න පුළුවන් ඉක්මන්ම දිනය පිළිබඳ අපව දැනුවත් කරන බව පැවසුවා. අපි හිතනවා ඊළඟ සති දෙක ඇතුළත ලංකාවට සයිනෝෆාම් මෙන්නත් ඔගේ ගෙනෙන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියලා.
Meanwhile, since the country began its vaccination drive, a total of 824,523 persons have been administered with the first dose of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine so far. In the meantime, the epidemiology unit confirmed 322 COVID-19 infections in the country yesterday. The Gampha district was the only district to report over 50 cases yesterday, with 66. 39 cases were reported from Ratnapura, while Colombo recorded 36. Meanwhile, Jaffna and Kaluthara districts confirmed 31 and 23 infections respectively. A further 103 infections were reported from 17 other districts, while 24 Sri Lankan expatriates also tested positive for the virus. Professor Channa Jayasumana is also upbeat about the declining daily case numbers, adding that the present situation is far better than what it was a couple of months ago.
ප්‍රතිකාර ලබන රෝගීන්ගේ ප්‍රමාණය 2000ක ආසන්න ප්‍රමාණයකට මේ වෙනකොට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. මෙම තත්ත්වය තවදුරටත් අඩු කර ගැනීම තමයි අපේ බලාපොරොත්තුව. විශේෂයෙන්ම රෝගීන් ඉහළම ප්‍රමාණයක් වාර්තා වුණු ස්ථාන නිශ්චිත වශයෙන් හඳුනාගෙන එන්නත්කරණය කිරීම නිසා අපිට හොඳ ප්‍රතිඵලයක් ලැබෙනවා කියලා මේ වෙනකොට පෙනිලා ගිහිල්ලා තියෙනවා. කියන්නේ රජය ඒ වගේම සෞඛ්‍ය අංශ මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් අනුගමනය කරපු උපාය මාර්ග සාර්ථක වෙලා කියලා තමයි මේ
As for today, 158 new COVID-19 cases have been identified in the island so far. Meanwhile, the country's overall number of deaths related to COVID-19 rose to 544 after 6 fatalities were confirmed yesterday. None of the victims, however, had actually died yesterday. 3 of the COVID-19 fatalities had taken place last month, while the remaining deaths had occurred on the 14th, 17th and 18th of this month. In other developments, 239 more persons recovered from the novel coronavirus today, pushing the overall number to 86,466. This places the country's number of active cases at 2,644.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today struck back at claims that environmental destruction is happening in the country under his watch. The head of state quoted several posts in public domain and said that investigations have proven that they are fake news. He also took aim at the so-called protectors of the nature for turning a blind eye to numerous instances of forest destruction during the past regime. Speaking during another stage of his initiative to engage with the rural communities in the country, President Gotabaya also criticized certain media institutions for abusing media freedom.
The 15th leg of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's initiative to engage with the rural communities, titled Gama Samaga Pilisandarak, got underway today at the village of Yumbuvelthanna in the Valapane Divisional Secretariat of the district of Norelia. After arriving in the village, the President engaged in a cordial conversation with the villagers gathered on roadside. The head of state then addressed the gathering.
ඒක කොච්චර ලොකු දෙයක්ද? දැන් මාව තමුන්නාන්සලා පත් කරේ මාස 60කට. දැනට මාස 14ක් ගිහිල්ලා. තව තියෙනවා හොඳ ගාණක්. ඉතින් සමහර අය මම ආයිත් එන්නේ නැහැ කිව්වයි කියලා කලබල වෙලා තිබුණා. ඒක ජනතාව තෝරන්නේ. මේ පාරත් ජනතාවනේ තේරුවේ. ඉස්සෙල්ලා මට දීපු 60 වැඩ කළා පෙන්නන්න ඕන. නේද හඳුරන්නේ? ඊට පස්සේ තමයි ඉතුරු ඒවා ගැන හිතන්නේ. ඉතින් මගේ අවශ්‍යතාවය මේ 60 මාස 60 තුල මේ විශේෂයෙන්ම අපේ ගම්මාන ඒවා දියුණු කරන්න. මොකද අපිට හැමදාම නගරයට විතරක් වැඩ කළා බෑ. දැන් අද අවාසනාවන්ත සිද්ධියක් වුණා පස්සර බස් රථයක් අඩි 300ක ප්‍රපාතයකට වැටලා දැන් මේ පාරවල් පටු නිසා ඒ බස් වේගෙන් යනවා. හැබැයි පාරවල් පටුයි. මම කවදාකවත් පරිසරය විනාශ කළා නැහැ. උද්‍යාන හැදුවා. තෙත් බිම් ආරක්ෂා කරා. ජලාශය හැදුවා මේ කොළඹ නගරේ, කෝට්ටේ නගරේ, පිළියන්දල, කැස්බෑව. අපි විහාර මහාදේවී උද්‍යානය හොඳට හැදුවා. ඔකත් විනාශ වෙලා තිබුණේ. දැන් ඊයේ ඒකේ විශාල අර බිල් බෝඩ් එකක් ගහලා. එහෙම නෙවෙයි පරිසරය ආරක්ෂා කරන්නේ. මම කොළඹ හැමතැනම පෝස්ටර් ගහilla නැවැත්තුවා. බිල් බෝඩ් ගහilla නැවැත්තුවා. දැන් අද පත්‍රයේ තියෙනවා ඔය දැන් ඔය කෑ ගහන විරුද්ධ පක්ෂයේ ඇමතිවරේ දෝනියන්දට හන්තානි රක්ෂිතෙන් තෑගි ඔප්පුවක් දෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒක සුද්ධ කරාලු. කරනකොට අඬන්න එක්කෙනෙකුත් නැහැ, අඬවන්න කෙනෙකුත් නැහැ. පුදුම මාධ්‍ය කට්ටියනේ ඉන්නේ. මාධ්‍ය ආයතන. දැන් ආම්දුරනේ මාධ්‍ය නිදහස කියන්නේ මාධ්‍ය ආයතනයේ අයිති මිනිහගේ නිදහස නෙවෙයිනේ. මාධ්‍ය අයිතිකාරයට ඕන විදියට රට දුවන්න හදනවා නම් ඒක මාෆියාවක්. අපේ රටේ රජවරුත් නැහැ, මහරජාලත් නැහැ. මහරජාලා හිටියේ ඉන්දියාවේ. මේ මාෆියා රජයවල් පාලකයෝ පාලනය කරන්න හදනවා. ඒව මාත් එක්ක බෑ. මම දන්නවා ඒවට පාඩම් ගන්නන්න ඕන නම් උගන්නන විදියත් මම දන්නවා. මම මාධ්‍ය නිදහස දීලා තියෙනවා. මාස 14ක් මම පාලනය කරා. කිසිම මාධ්‍යයකට කිසිම බලපෑමක් කළා නැහැ. හැබැයි ඒ අය මේක වැරදියට පාවිච්චි කරන්න ආවොත් ඒකටත් මම නීති තියෙනවා. කරන්න පුළුවන් ක්‍රම තියෙනවා. ඒවා මම ක්‍රියාත්මක කරනවා. ඒ මාධ්‍ය පමණක් නෙවෙයි ජාතික චින්තනයේ ඉන්න මාධ්‍යෙත් සමහර අය මේ බොරු කුඹුක් ගස් කැපුවා කියලා බොරු ප්‍රචාර දාලා තිබුණා. මම හොයලා බැලුවා කවුද මේවා ඉන්නවා ඔය අපේ යුද්ධ කාලේ ඔය මාධ්‍ය තමයි අපිට විරුද්ධව වැඩ කරේ. ඒ අයම තමයි දැන් ඒකේ හිටපු කණ්ඩායමක් අරකට රිංගගෙන මේව ප්‍රචාරය කරනවා. කුරුණෑගල අනවසරයෙන් එලි කරන ලද කැලෑ අක්කර 77යි 2015 ඉඳලා 2019ට. පුත්තලමේ අක්කර 258යි. මොනරාගල අක්කර 100යි. රත්නපුර අක්කර 42යි. අනුරාධපුර අක්කර 224යි. මේ වගේ විවිධ මේ තියෙන්නේ විස්තර. දැන් මේවට කවුරුත් ඇඬුවෙත් නැහැ, ඇඬෙව්වෙත් නැහැ. මේවට ඒගොල්ලෝ දැක්කේ නැහැ ඒ කාලේ. ඇයි ඒගොල්ලන්ට අවශ්‍ය රජයවලනේ බිහි කරගෙන තිබුණේ. බොරු ප්‍රචාර ගෙනියනවා කියන්නේ JVP පරිසර වේදියෝ. අර මූණු පොතේ දානවා. සිංහරාජ්‍ය අවසන් ගමන් ගිය තවත් ගහක් කියලා දානවා. හැබැයි මොකද්ද මේ? ඉන්දියාවේ ඔඩීෂා නගරේ එහෙ තිබුණු ගහක් කැපපු එක මේ කියලා දානවා. උඩුදුම්බර වන විනාශය කියලා ඡායාරූපයක් දාලා තියෙනවා. ඒක මේ රටේවත් නෙමෙයි. මේක දැක්ක ගමන් කියත හැකි මේ රටේ නෙමෙයි කියලා. ඉතින් ජනතාව මුලා කරන්න බොරු ප්‍රචාර ගෙනියනවා. මේවට රැවටෙන්න එපා.
People then came forth with their grievances which were addressed by the president.
Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa returned to the island a short while ago, concluding his two-day visit to Bangladesh. Meanwhile, 6 memorandums of understanding were inked between Sri Lanka and Bangladesh today, and the Prime Minister held talks with Bangladeshi PM Sheikh Hasina. During the talks, attention had fallen on enhancing cooperation in various sectors, ranging from economy to politics.
Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is on a 2-day state visit in Bangladesh, was hosted at a banquet by his Bangladeshi counterpart Sheikh Hasina. Meanwhile, before bilateral discussions got underway, the first meeting between the two premiers was at the Prime Minister's Secretariat in Dhaka. The Prime Minister's office said that during the meeting, PM Rajapaksa invited PM Hasina to visit Sri Lanka. Later, bilateral discussions commenced between the two leaders, during which attention had fallen on enhancing relations in the fields of economic, investment, technology, agriculture and fisheries, as well as politics. The Bangladeshi PM had meanwhile promised to send a batch of equipment needed to combat the pandemic under the SARC COVID-19 Emergency Fund. She had also agreed to provide Bangladeshi varieties of paddy suitable for the Sri Lankan climate and to extend cooperation in developing the freshwater fisheries industry. The Prime Minister's office said that the two leaders had also agreed upon taking measures to eliminate terrorism and to tackle human smuggling. Views had also been exchanged on strengthening political relations between the two countries, with the year 2022 making 50 years of diplomatic ties between the two nations. Following the bilateral talks, 6 memorandums of understanding were inked by the two sides. Among them are strengthening youth affairs development, agricultural research, exchange of documentation on vocational qualification, nurses and healthcare workers training, study of international relations and cultural exchange of cultural programs. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Rajapaksa also visited the Memorial Museum of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who is considered the father of the nation by the Bangladeshi people.
We will see you once more on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Sunlight Care Naturals. Obe edum kya karai.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, the Tamil National Alliance says that its hopes are high that India will vote for the UN resolution against Sri Lanka next week. TNA spokesperson MPMA Sumandiran has told an Indian media outlet that though it is up to India to vote for the resolution or abstain, the TNA expectations are clearly that India must support and vote for the resolution. Citing India's past voting patterns in the 7 UN resolutions on Sri Lanka since 2009, Sumandiran points out that India has voted in favour of resolutions thrice in 2009, 2012 and 2013, while abstaining in 2014. He says that given this track record, the TNA does not expect India to vote against the resolution. As for referring Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court, Sumandiran says that one cannot go to the ICC without the cooperation of Sri Lanka or to a referral by the Security Council where permanent members have veto powers. He goes on to say that it seems almost impossible to go to the ICC in the prevailing situation, but conditions do change and geopolitics also change. Sri Lanka today suffered one of the deadliest traffic-related tragedies in the recent past. A bus fell down a 250-foot precipice, killing 14 people and injuring dozens more. The incident happened early this morning in the area of Passara. Police say that negligence and carelessness are written all over the incident.
A bus plying from Lunugala to Colombo fell down a 250-feet precipice near the 13th milepost on the Lunugala-Passara main road between 6:40 and 6:45 this morning. The tragedy was caught on CCTV installed in the vicinity of the scene of the incident. The driver of the bus is seen turning to the left, seemingly to allow an oncoming lorry to pass by. The road was partially obstructed owing to a rockfall on the side of the lorry and had occurred over a month ago. The fallen rocks meant one vehicle having to stop for the other to pass by. What's more, a part of the road on the side of the precipice has visibly eroded, shrinking the road even further. That is where the bus ultimately fell into the precipice. The police say that there were more than 40 passengers aboard the bus when the tragedy struck. The area residents took swift action to rescue victims and admit them to the Passara and Badulla hospitals. The police and army personnel launched rescue operations amid the threat of rock falls. The incident resulted in the death of 14 passengers, 9 men and 5 women. It also left over 34 persons with injuries. The police say that 5 children are among the injured.
සීට් එකේ යටට ගියාම එදිච්ච පාරේ
බබත් නිදාගෙන හිටියේ ඔලොක්කේ මාත් නිදාගෙන හිටියේ කදුන එක දන්නේ නැහැ හිසි වුණා.
The bus driver, meanwhile, is in critical condition.
ලංකාවේ වෘදු එකහමාරක වගේ කාලයක් ඇතුළත සිදුවුණු වැඩිම පුද්ගලයන් ගණනක් මිය ගිය. ඒ වගේම වැඩිම පුද්ගලයන් ගණනක් තුවාල ලැබූ රියානතුර රියදුරු අසුනේ එක්තරා පුද්ගලයෙක් හිරවි හිටියා. ඒ වන විට මියගොස් තිබුණා. මුලින් පැමිණි වාර්තාවල සඳහන් වුණේ බස් රථයේ රියදුරු මියගොස් ඇති බවට. නමුත් මේ වන විට සනාථ වී තිබෙනවා. එම බස් රථයේ රියදුරු අසුනේ සිරවි සිටි පුද්ගලයා රියදුරු නොවන බවත් රියදුරා අසාධ්‍ය තත්වයෙන් මේ වන විට ප්‍රතිකාර ලැබමින් සිටින බව පෙනියන්නේ කියලා. නමුත් පැහැදිලිවම නොසැලකිල්ල අපරීක්ෂාව කියන කාරණේ සඳහන් වෙනවා.
The bodies of the deceased are placed at the Badulla General Hospital and the post-mortem examinations will be conducted after performing PCR tests. In the meantime, the Uva Governor's Office and the Road Passenger Transport Authority of the Uva province met today. During the talks, it has been decided to provide compensation to the victims' families with 30,000 rupees allocated for each of the deceased.
Meanwhile, a paratrooper of Sri Lanka Air Force died during a training session in the area of Uhana in Ampara this morning. Parachutes of 2 paratroopers had entangled at around 8,000 feet altitude over Ampara. The other SLF officer who sustained injuries in the incident was admitted to the Ampara hospital for treatment. The deceased officer is identified as a 34-year-old squadron leader of the Sri Lanka Air Force. In other local stories, Transparency International Sri Lanka today welcomed the decision by Sri Lankan Airlines to sue the company Airbus SC for $1 billion in damages, loss of reputation, reimbursement of cost and interest. Sri Lankan Airlines has also called for the cancellation of the purchase agreement for 4 A350-900 Airbus aircraft and the return of the advance payment of $19 million made for the aircraft. The move by the Sri Lankan Airlines follows information revealed through a deferred prosecution agreement between the Serious Fraud Office UK and Airbus SC in relation to the bribings of public officials by Airbus SC in several countries, including Sri Lanka. While commending the move by Sri Lankan Airlines to use, or in fact sue Airbus, TISL expressed concern that the alleged perpetrators of corruption in Sri Lanka are yet to be held accountable domestically. We will see you shortly. Bear with us. Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, oil prices suffered their biggest weekly fall since October as signs of falling demand in key markets abruptly halted a vigorous rally. The international benchmark Brent crude ended the week down almost 7%, settling at $64.53 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate fell by a similar margin to $61.42 a barrel. The slide put the brakes on an almost unbroken rally this year. Brent and WTI have soared more than 60% since early November as the world has begun to reopen from pandemic-induced lockdowns. But analysts say that the rally had moved ahead of itself after Brent pierced the $70 a barrel mark last week, with traders refocusing on renewed lockdown measures in parts of Europe and signs that physical demand in China and the US remain fragile. European markets, meanwhile, closed lower yesterday after a spike in bond yields reignited concerns about stock valuations. European stocks began the day with a weak handover from Asia Pacific, where shares mostly declined during yesterday's trade, following Thursday's sell-off stateside. The Pan-European Stock 600 closed the session about 0.8% lower. Banks were the worst performing stocks yesterday, dropping 2.3% to lead losses as all sectors expect utilities slid into the red. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell after the Federal Reserve's decision to not extend the pandemic-era capital breaks for banks stoked a rising bond yields as a sell-off in financial stocks. The blue-chip Dow slid 234.33 points, pressured by Visa and JP Morgan. The S&P 500 dipped 0.1% to 3,913.1, closing off its lowest level of the day, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 0.8% to 13,215.24 as investors bought the dip in tech shares. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.